On the morning of Sunday, September 24, 2006, the quiet calm of a small Pocatello neighborhood was shattered irreparably. Allison and Frank Contreras returned to their home, where their 16-year-old niece, Cassie Jo Stoddart, was house-sitting. Instead of the warm reunion they expected, they were confronted with a scene of unimaginable horror. Inside the house on Whispering Cliffs Drive lay Cassie Jo, brutally murdered in a violent and senseless act that would send shockwaves through a community unaccustomed to such darkness. Law enforcement officers, summoned by the anguished 911 call, entered a crime scene that defied easy explanation. Despite the brutal nature of the attack, investigators found no signs of forced entry, no broken loss, no shattered windows, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The absence of robbery suggested a motive far removed from theft or random violence. Instead, Captain John Gansk and his team recognized the marks of a desperate struggle. The young girl had fought fiercely against her attacker, the telltale bloodstains and overturned furniture bearing witness to her final, valiant resistance. This was not a crime of opportunity, but one steeped in premeditation and cruelty. For the residents of Pocatello, a town where neighbors knew one another and teenage misbehavior rarely escalated beyond minor rebellion, the news spread like wildfire, kindling a profound fear. Cassie Jo was not just a teenager from the neighborhood. She was a junior at Pocatello High School, a young woman known and loved by friends, teachers, and family. The school halls, once filled with everyday chatter and adolescent hopes, now buzzed with whispers of the unspeakable. Bannock County Sheriff Lauren Nielsen captured the collective horror when he described the murder as a senseless, premeditated killing for the thrill of killing, a stark reminder that sometimes the most brutal acts emerge not from strangers lurking in the shadows, but from within the very social circles meant to provide safety and trust. As the community grappled with the chilling reality, a terrifying question took hold. How could such calculated violence erupt from the familiar, from those Cassie knew and called friends? This was a betrayal of the deepest order, a rupture of the social fabric that left neighbors eyeing one another with suspicion and grief. The haunting fact that the perpetrators were among Cassie's peers cast a long, dark shadow over Pocatello, transforming a peaceful town into a landscape of fear and sorrow. The discovery on that Sunday was not just the end of a young life, it was the awakening of a nightmare that would unravel the innocent veneer of the community, revealing a tragic story of trust weaponized and innocence lost, setting the stage for the harrowing tale that would soon unfold. Cassie Jo Stoddart was not just the victim of a tragic crime. She was a vibrant, determined young girl brimming with promise and the warmth of those who knew her. At just 16 years old, Cassie was a junior at Pocatello High School, where she was known as much for her bright spirit as for her headstrong nature. Those who loved her remember her as someone with an unshakable sense of responsibility, a young woman who stood as a steadfast figure in a world often defined by uncertainty. Her brother Andrew recalls Cassie as really smart and headstrong, someone he looked up to deeply. This wasn't just sibling affection. It was genuine admiration for her strength of character and the light she brought to her family. Teachers, too, noticed her. Bob Beeson, Cassie's art teacher, spoke of her with a quiet sadness, himself seasoned in loss but never having confronted anything as senseless as this. She was talented, he said, an artist with a future averted by a brutal and premature end. On September 22, 2006, Cassie's final day began under the ordinary trappings of teenage life. A camera at school caught her casual greeting, an everyday moment, a simple hi by her locker, unaware of the darkness preparing to close in around her. After classes, her mother, Anna, picked up Cassie and her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, driving them to the Contreras family home. Cassie was set to house sit for the weekend, charged with looking after her relatives' 3 cats and 2 dogs. In many ways, this job seemed a small responsibility, but for Cassie, reliability was intrinsic to who she was. Later that evening, when strange and unsettling events began unfolding in the house, Matt offered to take Cassie back to his family's home for safety. A chance to escape vulnerability. Yet, Cassie's commitment to duty was unwavering. She declined, determined to stay and care for the pets, a choice born from maturity, loyalty, and trust. Tragically, it was also a choice that sealed her fate. Matt Beckham was by her side through that last day and evening, anchoring both her and the unfolding story. Their relationship was a source of comfort in green youth, but it would also underscore the terrible isolation Cassie faced once Matt left the house that night, his parents arriving to pick him up shortly before the violence escalated. This departure left Cassie alone, exposed in the home that was meant to be a haven. Cassie's life was not defined solely by those final, horrific hours, but by the pieces of her story shared by those closest to her. Her brother Andrew's reflections reveal a family shattered yet resolute in protecting her memory. Her art teacher's reverence for her talent and character paints a poignant portrait of lost potential. Each memory shines a light on the young woman behind the tragedy, vibrant, cherished, and deeply human. In these reflections and the retelling of her last day, the reality emerges not of a faceless victim, but of a girl who lived fully, loved fiercely, and held on to her responsibilities until the end. It is this portrait of Cassie Jo Stoddart that breathes life into the tragedy and compels us to listen, beyond the horror, to remember the person, not just the crime. As we leave this part of the story behind, we hold on to the memory of Cassie's spirit, preparing to uncover the harrowing events that would follow after that fateful night at the Contreras home, where trust was shattered and a nightmare unfolded. On the evening of September 22, 2006, a veneer of normalcy cloaked the Contreras household on Whispering Cliffs Drive, a setting soon to be cast into inescapable darkness. The night began like countless others for Cassie Jo Stoddart and her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, two high school classmates spending a quiet evening together while Cassie was house-sitting for her relatives. What neither could have anticipated was the arrival of two more classmates, Brian Lee Draper and Torey Adamcik, whose presence was the harbinger of a nightmare disguised as friendship. As the door opened to admit Draper and Adamcik, there was no suspicion, no alarm. Cassie and Matt welcomed them with the openness of young people expecting a simple evening of companionship. The four settled in with plans to watch a movie, Kill Bill, Volume 2, a seemingly innocuous choice for a casual hangout. But beneath the surface, Draper and Adamcik harbored intentions far more sinister than the simple enjoyment of a film. Their friendship was a carefully constructed mask, concealing the cold calculations of two teenagers who would turn trust into a weapon. The boys took the opportunity to survey the house, their eyes mapping a blueprint of potential for what would come next. Cassie showed them around, unguarded, trusting, unaware of the danger that lurked beneath the surface of this friendly visit. The exploration extended to the basement, a detail that would later be revealed as critical, a point of entry that Draper and Adamcik planned to exploit. This wasn't casual curiosity, it was reconnaissance. The safety of the home was being methodically undermined. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere remained deceptively ordinary. The presence of friends, the shared laughter, the comfort of familiarity, all served to lull Cassie Jo and Matt into a false sense of security. When Draper and Adamcik left around 9:30 p.m. claiming they were heading to a movie theater, no one questioned their story. But before stepping out, Draper executed a quiet, chilling act that would seal the betrayal. Unnoticed, he unlocked the basement door, a subtle but profound gesture that marked the shift from innocent visit to deadly trap. The house, once a sanctuary, was now a prepared stage for horror. This single action, unlocking the basement door, was more than just an opening to a physical space. It was an opening to the shattering of trust itself. The act was silent, secretive, and sinister in its intent. It was the crack in the facade of camaraderie and goodwill, the moment where friendship was weaponized into something grotesque. Draper's deliberate choice to leave the basement accessible revealed a calculated mind ready to return under cover of darkness, to enact a plan born of cruelty and premeditation. The evening's events echo with the profound unease of knowing a seemingly ordinary night was carefully manipulated to allow entry for malevolence. The welcoming smiles and casual conversations, the shared movie, and the mutual comfort masked a deadly plot. Cassie and Matt, unsuspecting and trusting, would soon find their safe world invaded by those they considered friends. What was meant to be an evening of friendship inexorably became the prelude to terror. Draper and Adamcik's duplicitous presence and actions exposed the fragility of trust when wielded as a weapon. The unlocked basement door stands as a dark symbol, an invitation to betrayal, an entry point to violence, and the threshold where innocence gave way to unimaginable tragedy. As the night progressed beyond their departure, the house was no longer just a home but a trap set with careful forethought. The quietness that followed belied the storm that had been unleashed, a storm that would forever stain the walls with memories of a friendship turned deadly. This evening laid the foundation for the horrors to unfold, marking a turning point from familiarity to fear, from safety to the unimaginable. The tale of that evening warns of the darkness that can lie beneath the mask of friendship and the devastating consequences when trust is exploited. It leaves us grappling with the chilling truth that sometimes the most dangerous threats come not from strangers, but from those closest to us, quietly preparing the moment when the shadows will fall. As we close this chapter, the stage is set, secrets unlocked, trust broken, and a night forever imprinted with betrayal. What followed in the hours afterward revealed just how fragile safety can be when the quiet descent into horror begins from within our own circle. The night descended over whispering cliffs with a deceptive calm, a darkness that would soon be overshadowed not just by the absence of light, but by an abyss of terror unlike anything the quiet neighborhood had ever known. Brian Lee Draper and Torey Adamcik had earlier left the house on the pretense of a simple, uneventful night out. But they returned under the cover of night, slipping once again into the home they had so coldly and calculatedly invaded. What unfolded thereafter was a chilling example of psychological warfare, executed with painstaking cruelty and heartless premeditation. As the clock ticked beyond 10 in the evening, the power in the Contreras household began to falter. It was no accidental blackout or fleeting electrical glitch, it was a strategic move designed to unnerve and isolate. Draper and Adamcik manipulated the fuse box with methodical precision, plunging the house into darkness. The sudden loss of electricity transformed the familiar home into an environment thick with uncertainty and fear. Every creak of the settling house and every whisper of movement in the shadows took on new meaning, amplified by the void that only darkness can create. Cassie Jo Stoddart and her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, were trapped in this stifling blackness. The quiet grew heavy, and the air was charged with an almost tangible tension. Matt, unnerved by the odd events and aggravated nerves, reached out to his mother, voicing concern and seeking refuge for Cassie. His mother, recognizing the unease in his voice, offered a simple choice. Cassie could abandon her responsibility of house-sitting and come stay with them for the night. Yet Cassie, embodying the steadfast duty for which she'd long been known, chose to stay behind. That decision, heroic in its sincerity and tragic in its consequence, left her alone as the house quieted once more, and Draper and Adamcik's plan moved toward its darkest crescendo. At approximately 11:15 p.m., Matt was picked up by his parents, leaving Cassie vulnerable, isolated, and defenseless. The shadows seemed to close in more tightly around her as the killers, dressed all in black and donning grotesque white masks, prowled silently yet purposefully. The darkness was their ally, a cloak that concealed their twisted intentions. They crept up through the basement and into the heart of the home, the living room where Cassie sat. Draper, to maximize the effect of their psychological assault, slammed a closet door near the stairwell just before descending upon her, shattering the fragile silence and ratcheting up her terror to unbearable heights. In that moment, the home was no longer a sanctuary but a chamber of unspeakable horror. What followed was an unrelenting, frenzied attack. Nearly 30 stab wounds marred Cassie's body, a violent testament to the chaotic brutality of the assault. The knives that tore into her were instruments of hatred and malice. The number and ferocity of the wounds revealed a merciless frenzy rather than a calculated single strike. Some of these wounds were grievous, potentially fatal, underscoring the grave peril she faced in those moments. Yet, amid the merciless onslaught, Cassie did not surrender quietly. The scene bore evidence of her desperate fight for survival as she battled with a spirit none could break. Blood spattered the living room floor, and the marks of struggle painted a vivid, haunting image of a young woman clinging fiercely to life even as darkness engulfed her. This moment, the collision of innocence and pure malice, captures the horror of the night. Cassie's vulnerability, heightened by the absence of her boyfriend, and Draper and Adamcik's cold-hearted execution of their plan culminated in one of the most gut-wrenching aspects of this tragedy. the loss of a young life in the place she once felt safe. The manufactured blackout was more than a tactical move. It was a form of psychological torment, amplifying fear through the primal dread of darkness and solitude. Draper and Adamcik exploited this vulnerability with chilling calculation, transforming the house from a home into a trap, from a refuge into a prison of shadows and violence. In examining the scene through the eyes of investigators and considering the trauma etched into their night, the sheer scale of the attacker's cruelty is laid bare. Captain John Gansk later described the brutality by noting Cassie's extreme fight, a detail that speaks volumes about her courage and tenacity even in the face of catastrophic violence. The remnants of that night, bloodstains, the shattered veneer of safety, and the echoes of a desperate struggle are images that leave an indelible mark on any who ponder the tragedy. The planned psychological warfare, the calculated isolation, the savagery of the assault, all converge into a story of a terrifying betrayal, shattering the illusion of friendship and exposing a nightmare spun by two teenage killers obsessed with infamy and power. It is impossible to overlook the bitter irony in the darkness Draper and Adamcik imposed, a darkness both literal and symbolic. They cast a shadow over Cassie's young life, a shadow that would eclipse her future and cast a pall over the community she belonged to. The terror that unfolded that night signals a brutal loss of innocence. Not just Cassie's, but that of an entire town and generation forced to confront a cruelty born not of strangers, but of familiar faces hiding unimaginable malice beneath a mask of friendship. As this chapter closes, the stark reality settles in. A simple house, a quiet neighborhood, became the stage for a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. The psychological warfare waged by Draper and Adamcik culminated in a horrific act of murder, a deliberate, calculated extinguishing of a vibrant life. And with that, the community's trembling journey to uncover the depths of this darkness was only just beginning. From here, the investigation would ignite, peeling back layers of shattered alibis and painful truths, exposing the twisted motives and grim reality behind the facades these boys once wore as classmates and friends. But that is a story for the next chapter, the slow, painstaking journey toward justice amid the ruins of a stolen life. The investigation into the brutal murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart ignited a whirlwind of leads, alibis, and dark revelations that would soon shatter the fragile facade of innocence surrounding the case. In the very early stages, police sought to identify anyone with potential motive or opportunity, beginning with a logical suspect, Anna Stoddart's boyfriend. This man's fingerprints had been found on the basement fuse box, a crucial location since the electricity had been tampered with during the terrifying night. However, this lead quickly unraveled once it was confirmed that he had performed electrical work on the Contreras residence months prior. His presence at the fuse box was completely innocent and accounted for, swiftly clearing him from suspicion. With this initial person of interest ruled out, attention naturally turned to another key figure in Cassie's life, her boyfriend, Matt Beckham. As the last person known to have seen her alive, Matt became a focal point of the investigation. Detectives scrutinized his behavior closely, noting a seemingly flat emotional response upon hearing the news of Cassie's murder, which raised unease. Despite this, Matt cooperated fully with law enforcement and underwent a polygraph examination. According to Idaho State Police Captain John Gansk, Matt passed the lie detector test with flying colors, thus removing him from the suspect list. Yet it was during his interview that Matt disclosed a detail that would become the linchpin of the investigation. He revealed that two other teenagers, Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik, had also been at the Contreras house on the night the murder occurred. This revelation shifted the investigative spotlight sharply toward these two boys, who up until then had remained under the radar. The police summoned Brian and Torey for questioning. Both maintained a united story. They claimed to have left the house together around 9:30 p.m. and gone to see a movie in town, fabricating a simple alibi that seemed plausible at first glance. But under interrogation, cracks quickly appeared in their story. Neither could recall basic details about the movie they claimed to have watched, a glaring omission that alarmed investigators. The fragility of their fake alibi was confirmed when a theater employee denied seeing either boy that night. Their deception unspooled further when detectives confronted them with this information. Draper abandoned the movie story and concocted a different lie. that they had been out breaking into cars and had invented the movie alibi to cover their mischief. This was not only implausible but a desperate attempt to avoid deeper suspicion. Faced with mounting pressure, a polygraph test was scheduled for the next day to assess their truthfulness. But before the polygraph could even take place, the strain overwhelmed Draper. In a moment that marked the beginning of the case's darkest truths coming to light, Draper broke down emotionally in the presence of his parents and law enforcement. His confession was a mixture of admission and denial. He claimed involvement but portrayed the murder as a prank gone wrong. Draper said he only intended to scare Cassie, never expecting the night to end in such horrific violence. He recounted his shock as Adamcik suddenly and violently attacked Cassie, insisting again and again, it wasn't supposed to happen. It was supposed to be a joke. This was an effort to mitigate his guilt and frame the crime as an accident resulting from a prank spiraling out of control. However, the chilling reality went far beyond a misguided joke. Draper's confession exposed the malicious planning and cruel intent behind their actions. The unraveling of their alibis and subsequent admissions provided law enforcement with the crucial breakthrough in understanding not only who was responsible, but how the betrayal of trust was central to the crime. This turning point in the investigation laid bare the calculated betrayal, transforming the case from one of heartbreaking tragedy to a profound study of dark adolescent impulses and cold premeditation. The dissection of those shattered alibis and Draper's raw confession peeled back the layers of deception, revealing the true horror hidden beneath what had initially appeared to be a senseless killing. As the investigation continued, this momentum would lead authorities to further evidence and self-incriminating details that pinned down the extent of Draper and Adamcik's involvement, setting the stage for the grim revelations to come. The night that began as a gathering of friends had ended in a nightmare, one exposed through lies, broken trust, and a confession that cracked open the silence surrounding Cassie Jo's murder. This section of the story closes with that deeply unsettling understanding. What started as a horrifying prank turned into an irreversible, deadly act, forever altering the lives left in its wake. Black Rock Canyon, a remote, unremarkable stretch of land outside Pocatello, became the chilling stage where the darkest corner of this case was laid bare. It was here, under the guidance of Brian Draper himself, that authorities uncovered the carefully concealed evidence that transformed a tragic murder into a harrowing tale of premeditation and morbid fantasy. What was buried in that shallow grave was not merely the tools of a crime, but the blueprint of a calculated descent into evil. When Draper led law enforcement to Black Rock Canyon, no one anticipated the level of meticulous planning that would be revealed. Concealed within the earth, officers unearthed an arsenal that painted a sobering portrait of intent, knives, masks, and costumes. Each item spoke to a narrative far removed from a spontaneous act of violence. It was the artifacts of a twisted script, a rehearsed horror show that Draper and Adamcik had written for themselves. The severed reality of those items reminded investigators that this was not a murder born of impulse, but of cold, deliberate design. Yet among these grim discoveries, the most unsettling find was an almost destroyed homemade videotape. This death tape, as it would come to be known, had been intentionally burned and melted to obliteration, a desperate bid by the killers to erase their sins. But forensic experts, working patiently and painstakingly, managed to salvage it, peeling back charred layers to reveal footage that would ultimately serve as a damning testament to the crime's chilling nature. The tape was not a mere recording. It was a window into the killers' minds and their morbid intentions. It captured them orchestrating their plot behind the facade of teenage normalcy. What emerged from those grainy images was a narrative of two boys not only planning murder but seeking to preserve their moment of dark infamy, not just to commit violence but to film it, to memorialize it, and to broadcast their descent into depravity. Unlike the typical post-crime confession or courtroom testimony, this tape was a raw, unfiltered display of their cold-blooded fantasy made flesh. It revealed them as directors and actors in their own macabre theater, openly discussing their desire for notoriety alongside casual justifications for their actions. The footage showed them crafting a death list, targeting classmates drawn from a disturbing admiration of past school shooters, and aspiring to surpass them with their own lethal drama. Draper and Adamcik were not content simply to kill, they intended to make history, to immortalize their crime in a way that fused their horrific reality with a perverted performance art. Their plan was insidiously performative, a deadly game crafted for an audience that might never see the final act. This evidence shattered any lingering notion that the crime was an accident or a prank gone wrong. Instead, the videotape solidified the understanding that this was a night designed for murder, a premeditated, cold, calculated event motivated by a deadly mix of teenage bravado, admiration of notorious killers, and a profound need to assert identity through violent infamy. The implications were staggering. The tape exposed not only the heinous acts themselves, but the disturbing psychological landscape from which they sprang. It revealed the killers' chilling detachment from human empathy and the depth of their moral decay. They weren't just reacting to impulses, but actively shaping a narrative, a legacy of violence they eagerly sought to claim. As law enforcement pieced together the contents of this videotape alongside the weapons and masks buried in Black Rock Canyon, it became undeniable. The murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart was orchestrated with conscious intent and articulated through the terrifying language of fantasy. Through this grim excavation, the facade of two typical teenagers dissolved into the stark reality of a premeditated act that was as much about killing as it was about creating a spectacle, a murderer's performance they hoped would echo far beyond that fateful night. The uncovering of Black Rock Canyon's buried evidence marked a turning point in the investigation. It shifted the case from a horrific tragedy to a calculated act of evil made manifest, and set the stage for the impending revelations contained within the death tape that would expose the dark minds behind this terrifying crime in full. With this knowledge, we are forced to reckon not only with the act itself but with the chilling depths of a fantasy transformed into reality, a nightmare scripted in darkness and brought to life in the most brutal of ways. As the investigation moved forward, the death tape would emerge as a haunting testament to the killer's intent, revealing their motivations with unflinching clarity and defining this case forever as a profound study in the unmasking of evil. The raw footage from the so-called death tape grants us a chilling and unparalleled glimpse into the minds behind one of Pocatello's darkest crimes. Unlike usual evidence, this tape doesn't just recount the events, it reveals the killer's twisted thought processes and the sinister staircase of their plan from its inception to its grim conclusion. The tape opens in the mundane setting of Pocatello High School, where Draper and Adamcik, two teenage classmates of their victim, casually film themselves planning what would become a horror story all too real. The setting is ordinary, a classroom or perhaps the library, yet the content is anything but. They pore over a death list, a notebook filled with names of potential victims, scribbled with a cold calculation that belies their youth. Their conversation makes clear that their ambitions are not only deadly but infamously so. Their reference points? The Columbine massacre shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, whose notoriety they seemingly yearn to surpass. And the movie Scream, a fictional slasher film that they idolize, vowing to become the villains of their own scripted nightmare. Draper, momentarily shedding bravado, offers a rare glance into their warped conscience, looking into the lens with a mock apology. "I'm sorry to Cassie's family, but she had to be the one. We have to stick with the plan." This chilling statement cements their resolve, emphasizing that this is no deranged impulse, but a calculated act carried out with methodical coldness. Fast forward to the night of the murder, the tape transitions to the confines of their car, a private confessional booth where their bravado blooms alongside an unsettling nihilism. Draper and Adamcik candidly discuss the grueling task they've set themselves, the murder of their own friends, specifically Cassie Jo and her boyfriend, Matt Beckham. There is an eerie blend of adolescent swagger and detached fatalism in their words. They speak as though they are authors of history, eager to carve their names into infamy by outdoing their forerunners. In between quips aimed at an imagined audience of federal agents, for all you FBI agents watching this, you weren't quick enough. They dive into a philosophical rejection of societal norms. Adamcik boldly claims that killing should not be outlawed, that society's moral compass is just a construct. There should be no law against killing people. Draper echoes this with a mantra that speaks to a crude survival of the fittest worldview: natural selection, dude. Natural selection, that's all I've got to say. Their conversation dismisses religious dogma and legal frameworks alike, revealing a bleak moral vacuum where the rule of law and empathy have no place. The tape's final and most harrowing chapter records the aftermath of their violent deed, still confined to the car. The killer's voices hum with an intoxicating mix of adrenaline-fueled excitement and cold pragmatism. They confirm the murder plainly: "We just killed Cassie." This is not a joke, stripping the act of any denial or remorse. Yet, their dialogue swiftly moves from celebration to cold calculation. Adamcik takes command, orchestrating their steps to evade detection and dismantle evidence. He instructs Draper on how to dispose of incriminating objects and outlines their alibis, deepening their conspiracy with a chilling ease. The tape showcases their morbid camaraderie, their bond forged not by friendship but by shared violence and a mutual craving for recognition. Their narcissism shines through, as every moment is recorded not just to document the crime, but to immortalize their infamy. Together, these scenes meld into a terrifying manifesto, a visual testament to their dangerous blend of adolescent egotism, nihilism, and cold-blooded calculation. The tape unearths a disturbing duality. On one level, two teenage boys grappling with their own insecurities and desires for significance. On another, architects of a premeditated murder, consciously choreographing a legacy of horror both for themselves and for their audience. The death tape is an unnerving mirror reflecting how the quest for notoriety, when fused with a profound disregard for human life, can lead to devastating consequences. As we unravel the layers behind this tape, we confront the raw reality of how violence was not just committed but performed, an act simultaneously intimate and grotesquely public, underpinned by a chilling desire to be remembered at any cost. This audio-visual time capsule ushers us deeper into the dark psyches of Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik, setting the stage for the next chapters in the story, where psychological fascination meets the grim realities of justice awaited and served. Some crimes defy understanding, emerging from the deepest shadows of the human psyche, and the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart is one such chilling example. Today, we delve into the dark psychological landscape behind this killing, exploring not just what happened, but why two teenagers were driven to commit such a brutal act for what they called the thrill of killing. At the heart of this tragedy lies a disturbing obsession with notoriety. Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik were not simply troubled youths, they were fixated on the idea of becoming infamous killers. Their admiration for notorious serial murderers and infamous mass shooters was no secret. On videotape, they openly expressed their desire to be remembered, to carve their names into history alongside figures like the Columbine shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. This morbid aspiration to achieve fame through violence became the fuel that ignited their deadly fantasy. But this was more than a mere quest for infamy, it was a sadistic thrill kill, meticulously planned and eagerly anticipated. They took pleasure in the cruelty of their actions, openly acknowledging on their so-called death tape that they were sick psychopaths who get pleasure out of killing other people. The act of murder was not just about domination or rage. It was about performance, a twisted spectacle where they cast themselves as both villains and stars in their own macabre drama. To understand how these two young killers came to share such a dark vision requires exploring their dynamic, a psychological relationship horrifying in its intensity and imbalance. Brian Draper felt profoundly inadequate, spoken by himself as a nobody desperate to be somebody through a big and bad act. His feelings of insignificance and invisibility created a fragile identity, one that sought validation through darker means. This vulnerability made him susceptible to the overwhelming influence of Torey Adamcik, whose personality was marked by dominance and nihilism, a belief system that rejected meaning, morality, and consequence. Their relationship can be described as a folie douce, a shared psychosis where two individuals foster each other's delusions and pathological thoughts. In this pair, Adamcik was the leader, the mastermind who shaped their plans and philosophies, while Draper was the eager subordinate craving approval. On the videotapes, Adamcik mocks Draper's contributions as lame, driving Draper to desperately prove his loyalty and worth. The power imbalance created a feedback loop. Adamcik's nihilistic worldview fed Draper's insecurities, intertwining their dark fantasies until reality blurred. This deadly partnership was a fusion of adolescent psychopathy and performative evil. It was no longer enough to just commit violence. They wanted their act to be immortalized, to create their own legend through the death tape, a visual testament to their crime filmed before, during, and after the murder. The tape revealed not only cold calculation but also a chilling bravado. They spoke about killing as a game, a way to make history, laughing off morality and law as irrelevant constructs. Their worldview was a nihilistic theater, with themselves as both audience and actors in a blood-soaked tragedy they directed. Draper's personal narrative reveals how adolescent identity crises can take a horrific turn in the presence of pathological influences. Driven by his fear of being a loser, he found in Adamcik a dark mentor who gave shape and direction to his violent desires. Together, they constructed a shared fantasy that culminated in real-world horror, a carefully orchestrated thrill kill that they believed would secure them a place in the annals of infamy. This case stands as a stark and chilling study of how adolescent psychopathy can manifest when fueled by a desire for recognition and validated by a dangerous peer dynamic. It exposes the terrifying potential when vulnerability meets dominance in a pathological alliance, producing a cold, calculated evil cloaked in teenage bravado and masquerading as a horrific performance for the world to witness. As we reflect on this disturbing psychological profile, we move deeper into understanding the events that followed, the legal reckoning, and the lasting scars this crime left on a family and community still struggling to reconcile the horror with the humanity lost on that fateful September night. The long journey from crime scene to courtroom was as harrowing as the murder itself. Following the arrest of Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik, the legal battle unfolded in a series of separate trials that laid bare the overwhelming evidence against the two teenagers, encapsulating the chilling reality of their actions. The prosecution built its case on three unassailable pillars: Draper's own confession, the physical evidence painstakingly recovered from the burial site in Black Rock Canyon, and the haunting death tape, a homemade video the killers had recorded, documenting their meticulous planning and cold-blooded celebration of murder. Brian Draper's confession marked a pivotal moment in the legal saga. Under the intense scrutiny of investigators, Draper broke down and admitted to the conspiracy and attack, though he sought to cast himself as a reluctant participant in what he claimed was a prank gone horribly wrong. This confession did not stand alone. It was corroborated by the chilling physical evidence uncovered where the killers had attempted to hide their tools and apparel, the knives, masks, and costumes, each item a testament to the premeditation behind the crime. Most damning was the recovered videotape, whose fragile, damaged remnants nonetheless revealed with brutal clarity the killers' own voices and images plotting and reveling in their plan. The defense's attempts to recast the tape as mere teenage fantasy or an amateur horror movie faltered against the harsh facts visible to the jurors. The trials in 2007 were intense and emotionally charged. Each defendant stood trial separately due to the conflicting narratives they presented, each blaming the other for the more egregious aspects of the crime. Yet, the evidence was unambiguous. The juries deliberated over the harrowing testimony and irrefutable material and reached the only conclusion consistent with justice. Both Draper and Adamcik were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The verdicts came with sentences as severe as the crime warranted: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Sentencing, delivered on August 21, 2007, was resolute and uncompromising. Judge Peter D. McDermott handed down life sentences without parole for both boys on the murder charges, accompanied by an additional 30 years to life for conspiracy. In the eyes of the court, the nature of the crime and the depth of its cruelty left no room for leniency. The legal battle, however, was far from over. Over the ensuing years, Draper and Adamcik engaged in a protracted series of appeals, challenging both the convictions and the severity of their punishments. Central to many of these appeals, particularly on Adamcik's behalf, was a strategic reliance on evolving juvenile sentencing jurisprudence. The landmark U.S. Supreme Court decisions in Miller v. Alabama 2012 and Montgomery v. Louisiana 2016 transformed the legal landscape regarding mandatory life without parole sentences for juvenile offenders. These rulings emphasized the necessity for trial courts to consider the diminished culpability and greater potential for rehabilitation in young defendants, rejecting blanket sentences without individualized assessment. Adamcik's legal team leveraged these rulings to argue for a reduction or overturning of his life sentence, asserting that at the time of sentencing, the court had failed to fully appreciate his youth and potential for change. Draper filed similar appeals, challenging aspects such as jury instructions and the handling of conspiracy charges. While Draper achieved some minor procedural victories, the Idaho Supreme Court vacated his conspiracy conviction due to erroneous jury instructions. The fundamental sentences of life without parole remained intact for both. The judiciary's stance throughout these appeals was clear and consistent. The courts repeatedly underscored the gravity of the offenses, emphasizing that the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart was not a momentary lapse but a deliberate, calculated thrill kill. Both killers expressed motives, as illuminated in the death tape and confessions, revealed a permanent incorrigibility, the rare classification of juvenile offenders whose crimes demonstrate such callousness and premeditation that rehabilitation was deemed implausible. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, in a decisive 2022 ruling on Adamcik's case, affirmed this perspective, upholding the life without parole sentences as justified responses to their heinous acts. As of 2024, Brian Lee Draper and Torey Michael Adamcik remain incarcerated at the Idaho State Correctional Institution, serving their sentences. Their legal battles, though lengthy and complex, culminated in a reaffirmation of justice for Cassie Jo Stoddart. In a grim coda, both men were summoned as potential defense witnesses in an unrelated 2024 murder trial, underscoring how their shadow continues to stretch beyond their own fate, though neither testified. This chapter of the case closes with a sobering reflection on how justice was administered, not only weighing evidence and law but grappling with the unprecedented challenge of juvenile culpability in crimes of extraordinary depravity. The convictions and sentences stand as a testament to the legal system's commitment to ensuring that those who commit acts of such malignant cruelty, even in their youth, face consequences commensurate with their actions. As we prepare to delve deeper into the aftermath of this tragedy, the enduring grief of Cassie Jo's family and the scars left on a community, there is no doubt that the trials and sentencing represented a crucial, if heartbreakingly incomplete, step toward delivering justice where it was most desperately needed. The murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart cast a long and lasting shadow on more than just the immediate day of tragedy. It reshaped the lives of her family and left a deep wound in the Pocatello community that still resonates years later. This section takes us beyond the crime itself, into the heartache endured by those closest to Cassie, the contrasting responses among the families involved, and the broader communal reckoning with a senseless act of violence. Cassie's family bore the immediate and profound brunt of the loss. Her brother Andrew has spoken openly about the rupture this murder caused in their lives. He reflected on how differently the family members processed their grief, each carrying their own private scars. The trauma was so severe that it took years before any of them could talk about what happened. For Andrew, the ceaseless cycle of legal appeals only reopened wounds that never fully healed, describing it as a recurring nightmare. His feelings toward his sister's killers remain steadfast. There is no forgiveness, only an enduring sorrow that colors every day since that brutal night. In her own words, Cassie's mother Anna voiced the heartbreaking reality of a life stolen, a young light extinguished far too soon. Her grief was not just personal but public, shared with a community struggling to comprehend the loss of one its own. Anna's later passing from cancer brought yet another wave of mourning to the family, underscoring a lifetime shadowed by tragedy. Her longtime partner Victor Price emphasized this finality. There could be no reconciliation or making amends with those responsible. The Stoddart's grief tells a story of unending pain, a life sentence of sorrow that cannot be measured or easily healed. The families of the killers face the tragedy with profoundly different responses that reveal much about the human ways to confront unbearable loss. Brian Draper's family approached the aftermath with a measure of remorse and acknowledgement. At a hearing, Cassie's grandparents encountered Draper's parents, who expressed their sorrow. In a rare moment of shared humanity amid the pain, the families embraced, affirming a mutual recognition of grief. This openness to accountability and regret stands in stark contrast to the stance taken by Torey Adamcik's mother, Shannon Adamcik. She authored a book entitled The Guilty Innocent, which was met with widespread criticism for its denial of her son's culpability. In the book, she sought to shift blame primarily to Draper and questioned the official narrative, refusing to fully acknowledge the devastating consequences for Cassie and her family. This divergence, one path marked by sorrow and acceptance, the other by denial and defensive deflection, speaks volumes about how tragedy fractures families, shaping their conduct and public voices in ways that echo beyond the courtroom. Beyond the intimate circles of family, the murder profoundly rattled the Pocatello community itself. The immediate aftermath saw a city wrestling with fear, confusion, and the impossible reality that such evil had sprung from within its own youth. The local high school, once a place of learning and social growth, became a locus of trauma. Counselors were brought in to support students shaken by the murder of their classmate and the fact that 2 others were responsible. The school became a place of mourning and memorial. Friends and community members created a mural in Cassie's honor, a lasting tribute that became a symbol of remembrance and resilience amid sorrow. The community's sorrow was accompanied by difficult questions about safety, responsibility, and prevention. In an effort to hold institutions accountable, the Stoddart family pursued a civil lawsuit against the Pocatello School District. The lawsuit revealed troubling details. Long before the murder, school officials were aware of disturbing warning signs regarding Draper and Adamcik's aggressive and violent tendencies. Reports dating back 2.5 years before the crime indicated that Draper had expressed intentions of a Columbine-style shooting and had even acted out threatening behaviors at school events. Yet the school's investigation was cursory at best. No meaningful disciplinary action was taken, and these incidents were not officially noted in the students' permanent records. The lawsuit argued that the school's failure to act on these clear warning signs contributed to the tragic outcome, raising urgent questions about the duty of care schools owe their students and the limits of institutional responsibility. However, the legal battle concluded with a ruling favoring the school district. The Idaho Supreme Court reasoned that because the murder occurred off school property and outside school hours, the district had no legal responsibility in this specific instance. While the decision may have been legally sound, it left an uneasy moral residue. Could more have been done? Should the warning signs have compelled stronger intervention? The case rendered a stark illustration of the gap between legal liability and moral accountability, a divide often felt most acutely by victims' families and communities. Pocatello was left to grapple with this tension, contemplating how to better safeguard its youth and prevent such darkness from taking root again. In summary, the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart irrevocably altered lives, her family contending with relentless grief, the community struggling to understand and heal, and the families of the perpetrators responding in profoundly different ways. Memorials and legal actions became avenues for mourning and seeking justice, but they could never fully fill the void left by a young life stolen so violently. The legacy of this tragedy remains a call to vigilance, responsibility, and collective reflection on how to nurture and protect the most vulnerable among us. As the story moves forward, it invites us to confront the difficult truths of human sorrow and institutional challenge, setting the stage for understanding justice, healing, and prevention in the wake of silence shattered by horror. The murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart stands as a chilling testament to the darkest depths of adolescent despair and the lethal consequences of a craving for infamy through violence. At its heart, this tragedy exposes the corrosive blend of youthful nihilism and a disturbing hunger to be remembered, not for achievements or kindness, but through acts of horror. It forces us to confront the sobering reality that beneath the veneer of ordinary teenage life, unseen warning signs can fester, signaling danger that too often goes unheeded. Cassie Jo was not just a statistic. She was a vibrant, responsible young woman whose life was cruelly cut short by 2 peers who turned their adolescent restlessness and feelings of insignificance into a meticulously planned nightmare. Through their death tape, Draper and Adamcik revealed a rare and disturbing glimpse into a fantasy of violence scripted for the need to outshine infamous killers like those at Columbine, seeking a twisted form of celebrity. This desire for notoriety, entwined with psychological fractures, created a deadly dynamic, one where the lines between reality and performance blurred into a horrific act of betrayal. The case also unfurls a complex social fabric. The killers were not strangers but classmates, embedded within a community that struggled to recognize the depths of their darkness until it was too late. The silence and inertia around their ominous behaviors and threats underscore a collective failure by peers, educators, and institutions to act decisively when confronted with chilling signs. This negligence, legal boundaries aside, raises haunting questions about the responsibilities communities bear in protecting their youth and averting violence. For the family and friends of Cassie Jo, the aftermath is an unending journey through grief and a quest for understanding in the face of incomprehensible loss. Their strength in sharing her story demands from us not just sorrow, but a call to vigilance. It is a stark reminder that behind every statistic is a human life, irreplaceable and precious. As we reflect on this tragedy, let us hold fast to the necessity of vigilance, responsibility, and above all, empathy. We must listen more intently to the cries of those struggling in silence, intervene before despair becomes deadly, and foster communities where the value of each life is recognized and nurtured. Only through such awareness and compassion can we hope to prevent future tragedies birthed from similar darkness. In remembering Cassie Jo Stoddart, we honor not only her life but the urgent call to confront and address the shadowy forces that can shatter innocence with cruel finality.